Uh, Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's conversation about the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you in particular to Chancellor Hapner for joining us. We really appreciate that. I'm Fritz, the Dean of the Korbel School. I'm really pleased to have you all here this evening and proud that we're sponsoring this conversation. You know, like all of you, it's been a troubling week. I think we're all deeply troubled by horrific killings in Israel, now the deaths of so many in Gaza. None of us can really be unaffected by the suffering of so many on both sides of the border. And I know that, for many of you, it's quite emotional and traumatic. We're going to have differences of view about the causes and the consequences of what's happening. But whatever our differences, we can certainly all mourn the tragic loss of life. And so I'd ask, as we gather here in this beautiful space, look on a beautiful evening in this wonderful safe space, that we just take a moment to reflect on what is happening in that region as we meet tonight. As I wrote in my message to the Korbel community earlier this week, at moments like this, at times like this, it's really tempting to reduce the immense complexity of an event, of these events, to a simple story, a morality tale in which one side is good and the other side is evil. And both sides in this larger conflict have such stories. Indeed, they are in many ways what animate what we see. Our role as a School of International Affairs is to avoid the trap of a simple story. We can and should condemn specific acts that are, really violations of our fundamental values, but it's not our role as a school to take sides in the overall conflict. It is rather to do what we can to create a space in which we engage the issues in all their complexity. And also speak our minds with humility and listen with genuine empathy. We don't know what direction events are going to take over the next few weeks. Like you've been following the news, and there's a lot to worry about. But as we process it, let's recognize that there will be strong emotions and differences. But we shouldn't shy away from that. We should engage because it's difficult. Let's engage these issues. But as we do so, let's give each other grace. I'm really proud of the conversations that have been taking place in this building, in this school, and indeed across the campus, in classrooms and outside of them, way in which we have engaged the issue and all its complexities. So that's what we're doing tonight. Let me explain just very briefly tonight's program. We'll first have a panel discussion among our faculty experts who are going to share their thoughts to help us understand what is happening and why it's happening and what might be the consequences. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions. You have cards at your table. You write the question, we'll collect them. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of the panel as well. Some basic ground rules. They are our fundamental ground rules. This is a space where we believe in free speech. Free speech means also that you let others speak. So the one thing we can't really tolerate is preventing others from talking this evening. But it's a place where we have free speech, and we like to have civil discourse based on facts and evidence. So I'm sure I know all of you agree with that. So with that, let me introduce our very distinguished panel this evening. I'll start on perhaps on your right at my left with Gary Grappo, as a former U.S. ambassador, and since 2016, a distinguished fellow at the Center for Middle East Studies here at the Korbel School. He has over 45 years of diplomatic and public policy experience in quite a variety of settings. He served as envoy and head of mission at the Office of the Quartet Representative in Jerusalem, Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, U.S. Ambassador to the Sultanate of Oman, Charge d'Affaires of and Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, and Director of Near East and North Africa Regional Affairs in the State Department. So quite a background. And here at Korbel, he teaches both graduate and undergraduate classes on U.S. policy in the Middle East and on diplomacy. Gary, thank you for being with us this evening. In the middle, we have Professor Ahmed Abdrabou, assistant professor here at the Korbel School. His teaching and research are focused on the Middle East and East Asia, originally from Cairo, Egypt. Professor Abdrabou has a master's degree from Meiji University and his PhD from Hokkaido University in Japan. He's currently the director of our U.S.-Japan diplomacy program at Korbel. His recent publications include From Ali Pasha to the Cairo Fire, The History of Modern Egypt, Good Governance and Civil Security Relations, a comparative study of Egypt and Turkey. So thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least, our moderator and commentator wearing both hats for this evening's discussion is Professor Micheline Ishay, political scientist known for her work in political theory, international relations, human rights, foreign policy, and the Middle East. Here at the Korbel School, she's the director of our Center for Middle East Studies. Her primary research and teaching are on the Middle East and human rights, and which are, of course, primary concerns of the center. She was a fellow and visiting professor and actually many places, and has lived in many years in the Middle East region, including visiting professors at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi, Tel Aviv University, and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She's the author of half a dozen books, including the 2019 Yale University Press book, The Levant Express, The Arab Spring, Human Rights, and the Future of the Middle East. And her most recent publication appeared this month on Israel's Golem and the Crisis of Israeli Democracy, which was in Newsline magazine, reprinted soon after in Jordan News. Unfortunately, Adam Rovner was unable to join us for this evening's presentation. So with that, let me turn to the floor to Professor Ishay. Thank you so much for organizing this event this evening.
Thank you so much, Fritz Mayer, for this wonderful introduction, and to see so many of you convening, unfortunately, for a very difficult event, but nonetheless extremely important. I see many faces of people I haven't seen for a very long time, and that makes me very happy. If I'm allowed to be happy, I am. And I know that certainly food and music is a good place to start this evening. Thank you, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hefner, for being with us and blessing us with your presence. I'm going to just say a couple of words about the missions of the Center for Middle East. Okay. The Center for Middle East Study is committed to academic freedom. It provides a platform for a variety of perspectives on regional issue. It's designed to improve understanding, also to improve deeper education and foster dialogue, while respectful of the intense emotion that must surrounding certain topic. The center, as our dean said, will not shy away from addressing difficult questions. We are ready to do that, while not endorsing, and we will not endorse any specific public political perspectives. We are looking for robust and rigorous conversations, and we will do it and conduct it in the spirit of the common good. That includes the advancement also of universal human rights, which is not the most neutral arguments in the Middle East. The center organized conferences, community learning, courses on the Middle East, student exchange program, and a student-led club. It's a mission for advancing understanding of the Middle East, goes beyond the university to include scholar, policymaker, and the interested public in Denver and throughout the Rocky Mountain region. So this is our mission. I just want to add, we are going to have an event. I'm going to plug it just at this moment because one of our students here who is really very capable, Omar Aitekala, sorry if I butcher your name, is going to do an event with me, I guess, Surviving the Storm, Unmasking the Reality of Morocco and Libya. That will be held Monday, October 30 at between 12 to 1:30 in the forum. So you're all welcome to come, both in person or on Zoom. So back to what was described by Fritz Meyer, it's the issues of sensibility, and that's really very important. We are in the pursuit of truth, and the pursuit of truth is always an effort to entertain arguments that are not the one that pleases the most. But we need to acknowledge that there are two conflicting collective narratives for Israeli and Palestinians and their respective supporters. So I will briefly describe both of these narratives. For Israeli, October 7th coincided with the traumatic anniversary of the surprise attack of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when Israel's existence was in question. This existential fear have been replayed by each of the major wars Israel fought against Arab states since 1948. For the Israeli, the latest slaughter of innocent Jews during Hamas attack has revived memories of pogrom, genocide, and anti-Semitism, and it's rekindling fears that hatred of the Jews will never end. But there is also another narrative. For the Palestinian, tragic war with their Israeli neighbors rekindled the collective historical trauma of Israel's 1948 War of Independence, which is called, as you might have all known, the Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. Throughout the Palestinian territories, dislocation, restricted movement, checkpoints, and random stop interrupt daily routines, providing a continual trauma that has been exacerbated by Israeli incursions into Gaza in both 2006 in particular and 2014. And while the Nakba may not be compared to the Jewish Holocaust, which is the ultimate rationale of the state of Israel, even Palestinians who have rejected violence feel, rightly so, that under occupation, the occupation has become intolerable. So we need a new narrative that is needed, that because moderate, even on both sides, have been losing hope. And hopefully with deeper conversations, we can create this new narrative. So I'm not going to just simply repeat the ground rules that the Dean has done, but I want really to make sure that we're all on board, that in the spirit of mutual respect, I would ask to everyone to ask for every side of this room. And I mean all sides with a big, big S, because there are many sides. And when you have Jews and Palestinians and their supporters, there are even more sides. So please listen. Please do not interrupt. Be respectful and sensitive, giving the strong emotion that is generated by recent event. Remember, no one in this panel, none of us, are representative of any group, any nationality. We are all informed scholars who critically entertain different positions before coming to our own. And because we have an unfolding war, we keep changing and reassessing our position along the timeline. So I know that we will have probably most likely differences among the panelists, which is healthy, and that's the way it should be. But I do know that we all equally share some basic concern for human rights values. And so that is a premise that I want to insist upon. So please do not use this space, I don't think you will, as a rally for any side or any form of activism. Tonight's event is not one of those spaces. So I thank you for respecting this request. Let me lay out first, I know a lot of students are here. Some of you are very aware and knowledgeable about the regions, other less. And so I'm going to just go through some of the facts and causes that led to the October 7 war please, people can push back. Nobody will stop you. I don't have certainly a problem with that. You'll find again notebooks. Remember, and you can write your questions on it, on the Q&A's questions. So briefly, who are the protagonists? Seems that there are a lot of them, but in fact, the first protagonist is Hamas in Israel. Hamas, the main supporters are Hezbollah and Iran, and Israel, main backers, we know, are the United States, but also some of the Western country as well. So what really happened October 7? What were the conditions that led to what we saw on October 7? So on the Israeli and Palestinian side, it's important to know that since November 22, Netanyahu was elected to power, forming an ultra-right government, an unprecedented ultra-right government, the government that has sought to overhaul Israel's judicial system. That government did provoke a wave of protest movement in Israel that was unprecedented, and week after week, Israeli protested against the reductions of or the weakening of the Supreme Court of Justice. The very government also announced that it would try to annex the West Bank. That again also provoked another set of reactions among the Palestinians in Gaza, which distracted the security forces for sure on the short term. So what that led to first is the effort to protect West Bank settlers drew attention from the border with Gaza, and second, much of the military side sided with oppositions to Netanyahu, included the threat by reservists and Air Force police and others to refuse to serve. As protests unfolded, many Israelis became more aware of the plight of the Palestinians in the West Bank. And there was perhaps a moment, even for a short-lived moment, when there was growing awareness and efforts to connect with the Israeli and the Palestinian sides when it came from the Israeli during the protest movement. So, but that moment is now is in setback, and we see the growing inclinations toward that has moved to a different direction. What is another possible cause that could have led to that outbreak of October 7? Well, one was the impending Saudi agreement to recognize Israel in exchange for US security guarantees. That agreement that was following the Abraham Accord, many of you may know that Abraham Accord has several rounds of negotiation. The first was the normalizations between Israeli relationship and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The second with Morocco and Sudan, and just the last third round was going to be an effort to normalize the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That, of course, prompted Iran's fears of the prospective deal, because there was an understanding that the United States would provide security guarantee to Saudi Arabia. So that is sort of the immediate, perhaps, cause that might have led to the October 7 outbreak of the war. But for those who need really a deeper narrative, it will take me a very long time to go through all the wars that happens between Israel and the Arab countries and the Palestinian. But I'm going to just provide you with a very brief narrative, because when there are students in the room, I want to make sure, and then others, I want to make sure that we all understand some of the landmark. So we all know that Israel was established in 1948 alongside a prospective Palestinian state whose borders have been specified in a UN resolution. That partition was rejected by 5 Arab states that attacked Israel on the side of the Palestinians. Now, until 1982, from 1948 till 1982, Israel fought a succession of wars with Arab states and Palestinians. It is important to understand that that changed after 1982, and in fact, later on, the conflict has mainly involved Israel and various Palestinian groups and governments, sort of after 1982. In the last iteration of the conflict, I need to offer very brief explanations of who Hamas is. Initially, Hamas was an offspring, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Its establishment included a network of social services, clinics, schools, and other charities. Hamas became politically active soon after its founding when it participated in the 1987 Palestinian Intifada, the first major Palestinian uprising. Its original charter called for the violent destructions of Israel, and even the revised version in 2017, a less bellicose revision, continued to reject the legitimacy of the State of Israel. That organization quickly acquired a very broad following thereafter. It denounced the 1993 Oslo Agreement between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, which is a Palestinian secular nationalist organization, which has established a process aiming at a two-state solution to end the conflict. Hamas, along with the Islamic Jihad group, launched then a campaign using suicide bomb during the second Intifada of 2000 and 2005, between 2000 and 2005, in order to hold this effort. 2006, it won a Palestinian election in Gaza that led to a fratricidal war between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. There have been no election, remember that, there had been no election for the past 17 years in Gaza. That is an important thing to remember when we're discussing about the legitimacy of Hamas with respect to the Palestinian. The PA has rejected violent means in its fight for statehood with Israel, but it has limited political authority in the West Bank, did not undergo also an election process. While Hamas rule over the Gaza Strip, the PA, the Palestinian Liberation Organization of the PA, is ruling in the West Bank. In 2005, Israel ended its military occupations of Gaza and removed 8,000 Israeli who had settled there. So a lot of information for those who come to it for the first time, and just a refresher for those who have been already there. So since 2006, Hamas has periodically launched thousands of missiles against Israel, provoking intense Israeli retaliation. Despite Israel policy of warning Gazan residents of impending attacks on housing Hamas military outposts using text and other means, thousands of innocents have been victims in the crossfire. This has greatly worsened the ongoing suffering resulting from the long-standing blockade of Gaza borders by Israel and Egypt, along with the very severe repression, and I'm not using those terms lightly, by Hamas theocratic regime. So mentioning some of the benchmark, I realized that does not give justice, because this is a long history, as you can imagine, and I would never have enough context to explain that. But Israeli and Palestinians have, as you know, very diametrically opposed narrative regarding even the cause of the conflict and the events that led to the present impasse. So I'm going to just take a pause here, having just provided you with as brief overview as I can on the conflict, and I'm happy to supplement more information with my colleagues here on the panels in the Q's and A's. I'm going to move first to my colleague and panelist, Ahmed Abdrabou, who is going to be talking about mainly about the Middle East regions, is an expert of the Middle East as well, and then we will move on to Ambassador Grappo. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ishay, Ambassador Grappo, Dean Mayer, and thanks for everyone who came today. Also for online viewers, thank you very much. It's a tough time for anyone who is connected or related to the Middle East one way or the other. If you have family in the Middle East, if you have friends, if you lived some time there, if you are familiar with the Middle East, if you are even just interested in Middle Eastern politics or Middle Eastern culture, it's a tough time. And I guess it's not fair to ask anyone not to be emotional at this moment. It's an emotional moment for everyone. I was very emotional yesterday when, this hospital was bombarded, but also, so no blame to be emotional, I guess. However, I guess I'm going to blame you if you decide to be ignorant, because I see ignorance as a decision, and ignorance for me is not that you don't know something, it's about you being unwilling to learn about other perspectives or other narratives. As Professor Ishay mentioned, it's all about narratives. And as Dean Mayer mentioned, it's all about narratives. It's all about stories. I'm very fascinated by Yuval Noah Harari. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this name, an Israeli historian who's very powerful in his, the way he writes. And he analyzed history as a history of conflicting stories and conflicting narratives. And I'm 100% convinced that this is exactly what it is. And I guess the Arab-Israeli conflict is also about different narratives, different perspectives. And in my point of view, the real problem is it happens when you don't want to see the other side. Here is the real problem. When you're not ready to listen to the story of the other side. And today I'm not inviting you to adopt, as Professor Ishay mentioned, any narrative, to agree or disagree with any ideology or any idea. I'm just asking you to try to put yourself in the position of the other narrative, of the other person or the other group, and hopefully you can understand. So it's all about understanding, even if you still agree or disagree. Now, my name is Ahmed, as you know. Let's assume that my name is David. And in academia, we use a very, very powerful pedagogical tool called simulation. And simulation is like when we ask students to read and learn about a position that they are not really familiar with. Let's say I ask someone to represent Russia in the Security Council. He or she is not familiar with this position. They 100% disagree with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I just ask my students to practice this in order to understand, not to adopt the position of Russia, but to understand the dynamics. So let's back to David. Let's assume that I was born in Haifa, in Israel, in 1980. My family is coming from, my father was born in Germany. And when he was 5 or 6 years old, he fled with his family, escaping the Nazi in Germany. They landed in Israel. For them, that was a safe home. My mother was born in Cairo, Egypt. And when she was 14 or 15, not she, but actually her family decided to leave Egypt. Even though they are Egyptians, they love Egypt. However, with the rise of Arab nationalism, xenophobia, the Arab-Israeli conflict, they decided to leave. They left their properties, they left their life in Egypt, and then again, they decided to find a safe home in Israel. I was born in Israel. It's not my fault. It's not my choice. So I guess if I hear anyone telling me you have to leave, or if I hear some political statements made by one political party or another political party, especially from the Arab side, that Israel should be removed from the map, I'll be very upset. I'll feel very insecure, because my very simple answer to this question is like, where to go? This is my home. And I guess nobody chooses his home, his or her background. So now let's say October 7, Hamas militants started to attack Israel. And let's assume that David has some friends, some family members, a teenager relative participating in this Nova music festival in the southern district of Israel. And then she was attacked. She tried to hit the road immediately. Unfortunately, she was ambushed and then she was killed. Now, I just ask you to visualize emotionally and mentally this situation, regardless if what's your background. where do you side, where you agree or disagree in this conflict. I guess you will agree with me that David, in this very specific background and situation, will feel very sad. And definitely, he will, even if he disagree with the current prime minister of Israel, he will still support him because, you know, war dynamics is all about being unified. And for sure, he will call Hamas organization a terrorist organization. There is no reason for him not to call it otherwise, because he lost relatives and because he feels that this is very unfair. And then he supports the war in Gaza because from his point of view, this is a very fair war. Let's, again, the second part of the simulation, let's say my name is Ahmed, which is my real name, but this time I come from Gaza, and Ahmed works in Gaza, so no problem with that. And let's say Ahmed was born in Gaza, 1980, just like David. Maybe his family originally coming from Haifa, and he himself was born in Gaza, but you know, his father kept telling him stories about his family and family roots in Haifa or in Yafo or in, you know, other Israeli cities. Back then in the 1940s or 1930s, it was mandated Palestine, British mandated Palestine. So he has always this dream of visiting, you know, where he's originally from. And he grew up without a state, without a nation state, without an army to protect him. And he grew up in somehow poverty, limited resources, and also he grew up with Israeli military occupation. I guess you may agree with me that also he, in this very specific position, will feel very unfair because he has been studying all the Security Council resolutions about the Arab-Israeli conflict, about Jerusalem, about the West Bank, about Gaza. Nothing of that is really implemented. So definitely he will be very outraged. He will be very upset. And again, when October 7 just came, he didn't choose Hamas. He was not supporting Hamas. He's not standing in the position of Hamas. However, just Hamas did what they did. And then he started to, you know, see missiles raining down on his house or in, you know, neighbors. And let's assume, again, just like David, he lost someone in the Israeli attack. I guess you may agree with me that in his position, he will be, again, very upset. And he will always look at Israel as an enemy. And he will always think that, you know, this life is unfair. Security Council is just above it. You know, the American side is very biased to the Israeli side. And in these dynamics, you know, he may develop some radical thought and radical even tactics. So he may support Hamas, even if his very original position is not to support Hamas. But, you know, again, it's time of war. And in the time of war, we have to be united. I claim this is a real problem in the Middle East. We have to understand the narratives. We have to understand the background. And now from a very neutral position, there is no way for me to say who's right and who's wrong. I'm speaking about individuals here. I'm not speaking about the entire case. So back to Ahmed of Korbel. I guess the conflict didn't start, the war in Gaza didn't start in October 7. I claim it goes way back before that. As Professor Ishay mentioned, maybe we don't have enough time, of course, to go after, you know, year by year. There have been so many developments. But I guess the real problem on the ground is a problem of international law being ignored. UN Security Council resolutions being ignored. For me, very personally, I don't see any reason for a zero-sum game. It doesn't help. So if an Arab politician or an Arab person just think that hopefully in this war, we will defeat Israel and we will remove it from the map, which some people, some Arabs may say nowadays, that doesn't make any sense. Because it will be another tragedy, another worldwide tragedy. And there is no reason for me to think that there is a way to remove Gaza from the map, or there is a way to live in peace without having the two-state solutions. This is very important. And the two-state solution is, of course, it has been always there. I'm sure many of you or some of you are familiar with. I understand on the ground there have been so many problems with that since the assassination of former Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister Isaac Shamir by Gil Amir. You know, the politics in Israel started to lean much more to the right. And it's always, you know, the reflection on the other side. So also in Gaza, they started to develop such kind of, whatever you call it, right-wing religious narratives and positions. And I guess this is the real problem in the Middle East. From the Arab perspective, the problem is as simple as Palestinians want to have a state, a real sovereign, independent state, where they can have a recognized identity, a recognized state, an international airport, police officers or army, even if limited. And I guess this is what they are calling for. Now, I don't want to exceed my time, so I will, how much time do I have? Okay, so Professor Ishay asked us actually to provide some sort of, you know, not solutions, but let's say insights on how can this be resolved, if it can. First of all, I have to be realistic. And being realistic is, and I'm sorry if I don't sound hopeful or optimistic, but I guess this war will continue for some time. And I'm afraid that it will also get out of control, and it may, you know, engage other parties, which is going to be even worse than it is now. And let's speak first of what we can do here at Korbel or at DU. This is an academic platform. This is not a political platform. We're not representing countries or groups, but we're just trying to help to understand. And I guess this is our main assignment, our main duty in academia. Professors, researchers, students, we have to learn how to understand. We have to prevent any kind of like emotions to escalate into violence. We have to speak out our mind, but also we have to understand, you know, other perspectives. And it's all about understanding, and it's all about learning. Unfortunately, at least from my own perspective, I don't see the media here as, you know, very, I don't want to use this term neutral. There's no way you can be neutral 100%, but at least many perspectives are not really very well explicitly shown in the media in the West or in the US. However, I still believe that here, our duty is to learn and to speak with each other and to stop demonizing the other party or the other side. And I guess this is the only way we can move forward. Moving to the political part, which is the most challenging part, of course, I guess the immediate action that should be taken is, of course, the humanitarian action. I'm not sure how realistic this is, but there should be a way to help the civilians of Gaza, to help people who are suffering in Gaza, to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu to limit or to stop or to see some sort of a ceasefire, if it's possible, to enter some humanitarian assistance to Gaza. I guess I was just speaking with Ambassador Grappo a few hours ago. President Biden declared that he was able to mediate between Egypt and Israel to convince the Israeli side to allow the Egyptian side to enter to send some food and maybe some other medical assistance. So this is like, you know, good news for me. I hope it's sustainable. And President Biden said that hopefully that will not be just one time. Israel said that they are not going to allow the assistance from their own side. Fine. I guess there should be also some real pressures on Hamas to free at least, I want to sound realistic, so at least to release children, to release women, to release elderly people, to release maybe people with some disabilities that they hold hostage right now. I guess that can hopefully, move things on. And on the long run, I see no future for the Middle East, no future for stability, no future for peace without the two-state solution. It's a story of international law. You have to respect international law. Without respecting international law, unfortunately, imagine if we are here in Denver, we decide all of a sudden we're not going to respect law enforcement. We're not going to respect laws. I mean, life will be very chaotic. Life will be very messy. And this is exactly what we have in international politics right now. There is no real consideration for the international law. Security Council is very dysfunctional, as we all know, because of the veto power and maybe some other dynamics. And again, I don't see a future without having two-state solution, an Israeli state that lives in peace, and also a Palestinian state, a real Palestinian sovereign state where people can just live with dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David from Haifa. My name is Fatima from Gaza City. And I have to say that I envy you for living in Haifa, because you probably can go to clubs and party and dance when I in Gaza City cannot do that. I do suffer a double burden, a very strong patriarchal society, which just as of recent does not allow me to move around without any male guardians. So I do envy you halfway, but at the same time, the siege has been very demanding on me, and I would really like to see things changing. So I'm going to call upon someone who has been part of the Middle East Quartet and hope that he can provide us interesting insight as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Micheline, and to my good friend and colleague, Ahmed, and to all of you for the interest you're showing by your presence here, and to all of those who are viewing online. I thought I would focus my comments this evening on United States policy and how the United States responds in a crisis like this, most especially in the Middle East, where I have some experience. I have to say, a good friend of mine and colleague whom I served in the Middle East called me up on October 7th, the day of these really barbarous attacks by Hamas. I happened to be at a Broncos game. So if you're looking to be cheered up from the Middle East, you don't want to be at a Broncos game. And we were just kind of reliving the experiences that he and I both had during our times of service in the Middle East. And regrettably, I had to say it's a lot of the same thing. Some of the players have changed, but we're seeing the same sort of violence that I had seen, that I experienced during my time, not only as the Quartet envoy in Jerusalem, but elsewhere in the Middle East, including in Saudi Arabia and Iraq. So how does the United States government, this amorphous blob out of Washington, respond in a crisis like this? It turns out that there are a lot of individual human beings who are very skilled and very knowledgeable on these kinds of issues and have seen these before and know the players and know the people and can swing into action immediately. Most of them happen to be Foreign Service officers, that is, career diplomats of the United States, and serve at our embassies all over the world, including those throughout the Middle East, which is what I happen to be. And I can assure you that all of the announcements that President Biden has made, for example, today, and before him, Secretary Blinken, all of those announcements just didn't happen because they showed up. Those are important. I certainly don't want to diminish the importance of the President of the United States in Israel. Has a most definite effect on the Israeli people and on their prime minister. But, well, we don't have an ambassador in Jerusalem right now, which is truly tragic. By the way, we don't have an ambassador, as shocking as it may sound, in Egypt either. Her nomination has been pending for 7 months now. But nevertheless, our diplomats can respond, and they are the ones who met day and night, 24/7, with anyone they needed to see. And they know a lot of people in these governments to get this work done so that when the Secretary of State shows up or the president, they can make this announcement. And they don't mind if they get the glory. That's part of the job. And that's what they do. Throughout the Middle East and in Europe, they're working, I can guarantee you, having done it myself, 24/7 at these embassies. Some of them can't order out for pizza, but I'm sure the falafel is coming on a pretty regular basis. So it's important to keep that in mind, because there are a lot of really committed, dedicated, knowledgeable, and experienced public servants who are committed to trying to fix this problem. My generation in the State Department, unfortunately, failed, but I stand in a long line of failed diplomats when it comes to peace in the Middle East. We've settled some, but not all. So that's the first thing that I think all of you should be aware of. There are really capable people. By the way, I mentioned the embassies. This holds true also for Washington inside the State Department and at the White House, the National Security Council. Second point I wanted to make, and this bears saying, a lot of folks, especially in the Middle East, don't want to hear this, but throughout the 60+ years of American involvement in the Middle East, with all its vicissitudes and vagaries, there has been one constant, and that is the United States supports Israel. Harry Truman was the first world leader to recognize the state of Israel in 1948, and that has not changed. And I don't think it ever will. Now, that policy, some may differ, has the broad support of the American public and the American Congress. Although I must say, we've seen some dissension in the ranks over the course of the last few years. But it generally holds true, and we really need to keep this in mind. And that's especially why Joe Biden, who knows the Middle East better than any president we've ever had, immediately reached out and told Israel of America's support. It's important to know that, and why he got on an airplane and flew to what is effectively now a war zone. Second point, and it's less relevant for our country, but it's especially relevant for the Middle East and even in Europe, and that is the United States doesn't give orders to Israel. We can't tell them, don't go into Gaza or don't do anything. In fact, we really can't tell any country that. No country takes orders from another. We just don't. But what I learned in my own experience as a diplomat, and especially on this particular issue, dealing with Israel and the Palestinians, I'll paraphrase a well-known quote from Abraham Lincoln, is keep your friends close and the Israelis closer. And there's a good reason for that. There's a good reason for that. A lot of people tell Israel what they should be doing. Our European friends, certainly a lot of people in this country. But if you want to get Israelis to listen, they have to understand that you support them, regardless. And I really commend Joe Biden for understanding that principle. It took me a while to learn that, but it's vitally important. And it's why he took the trip to Jerusalem, embraced Benjamin Netanyahu, with whom he has many differences, and said, we support you. And it's important for the Israeli people to see and to hear the President of the United States say that, because then behind closed doors, he tells Netanyahu, you have to allow these humanitarian goods to come across the border. and he'll listen. You don't order them, but he'll listen. And some of the flaws that I've seen in the past made by American presidents, and I won't name names, was the failure to understand how to work with our friends and partners in Israel. And I think Joe Biden gets it, and Tony Blinken gets it. Now, what is the focus of the United States government now? This is a highly complex issue. A lot of things are moving at the same time. What are we focusing on? Well, first and foremost, we want to make sure that the Israelis have the wherewithal they need to defeat Hamas decisively. That's what they set out to do. And by the way, we support that. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and there should be no confusion about that. It's very clear from the covenant that Micheline had mentioned earlier, and we want to see them to win. How that's defined, we'll have to leave to the Israelis to decide. Secondly, we want to see the release of these hostages, especially the American citizens. We don't know exactly how many Americans are among those. In fact, we don't even know how many hostages. We know Hamas took hostages. We know Palestinian Islamic Jihad took hostages. And we know that in the third wave of those attacks on October 7th, Gazans were coming across the border, mostly to see what they could steal from the homes of the kibbutzim and the communities. But if they saw Israelis, they would take them. So I'm not even sure Hamas actually knows how many hostages are being held. So it shouldn't be difficult to understand why we don't, and perhaps even the Israelis don't. But we are focusing, these diplomats that I had mentioned earlier are working day and night, and we have intelligence officers working just as assiduously to identify who these Americans are and how we can secure their release. There's the evacuation of American citizens from Gaza. We have over 600 American citizens living in Gaza. And it's the responsibility of the United States government to help them leave. And their family members. We don't know how many family members they may have. They have a right to leave too. In case you haven't heard, we have 2 marine amphibious ships that are steaming toward the Eastern Mediterranean, and one of their specialties is evacuations. We'll see how it pans out. We want to contain the conflict, and I'll be happy to talk a little bit later about how we're addressing that conflict in terms of the risk we face. Very serious risk we face of escalation from Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, from Iran, from Iranian-sponsored, inspired, trained militia groups in Syria, and then the uptick in violence occurring once again in the West Bank. And then finally address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which the president did today. May get into this in the future, but I will just mention that people are already thinking about moving ahead. That's what they do a lot in the State Department. What's next? You have people working the crisis real time, but you also have people starting to study, where do we go when this is all done? Because you have to have an objective. And in that vein, I wanted to mention a comment, a quote from Secretary Blinken when he was in Jerusalem at a press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu sitting next to him. He said that after this crisis, we have to begin to consider opening a diplomatic track to address the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations to live in peace, prosperity, security, freedom, justice, opportunity, and dignity. And that's going to be the focus once this conflict is done. Now, for Mr. Netanyahu, depending on how long he lasts in that position, that's going to be a very difficult pill to swallow. But as Ahmed and Micheline mentioned, this conflict is going to remain with us. You have to solve it. It's a human problem, and it requires humans, well-intentioned humans, to find the solution. And up to this point, obviously, we failed in that. The last point I want to mention, and this references both the comments of Dean Meyer and Micheline and Ahmed, narratives. As a diplomat, first thing you learn is you don't negotiate narratives. Now, you listen to them. They're important. They're extremely important. It gives you a sense of where the sides are coming from. You're very unlikely to change narratives. I saw this firsthand as the American representative in a negotiation that took place between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and they were spitting fire at one another. They were wondering why the American representative wasn't saying anything. Well, I'm an American. I don't have a narrative on this. I grew up here. I wasn't in Haifa or Cairo or anywhere else. I grew up here. And I listened to their narratives, and at the end of the day, was kind of depressed, wasn't very successful. The first day, right out of the chute, they're butting heads. Some folks from the Israeli delegation invited me to join them in the bar later that evening. So I said, yeah, maybe I will. Later in the evening, because I had stuff I had to do with Washington, we were meeting overseas. I did wander down to the bar. When I got there, the Israelis and the Palestinians were all sitting at the same table. They brought a bunch of tables together. They were sitting at the same table. Thankfully, this time, in this sort of informal group, they had sufficient lubrication, and they weren't talking narratives anymore. They were talking real issues. That's how you solve these problems. Move away from the narratives, understanding that it's almost impossible to change a narrative. If you're going to change a narrative, you, the holder of that narrative, has to change it. Someone from outside is not going to change it. But they were talking issues. How are we going to fix, whether it's economic issues, security issues, border issues? They were talking all of those with generous, I must say, supply of lubricant and also cigars. By the way, they were also sharing stories about their families, which really impressed me. They all knew their families. So there's a personal element of this that we also have to keep in mind. And as diplomat, you have to keep in mind. If you can use that, if you can leverage that, by the way, I think Joe Biden's doing a pretty good job of that. It counts for something. Like Micheline and Ahmed, I'll be happy to take some questions later on.
Does it work? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Grappo. You don't have personality disorder like Ahmed and I. I appreciate that. And you just need lubricant to focus your mind. So sorry to the audience, we haven't done so. I would like to provide Ahmed Abdrabou just comments to,
Yeah.
and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Just one minute. I can't see the difference now between scholars and diplomats, but I guess why I think narratives are important, because narratives are about people. The problem is when you don't change the story that people keep telling each other, you're not solving the problem. You're not having a sustainable political outcome. I'll give you one example. In the countries that I grew up with, Egypt, it's the first Arab country to strike a deal with Israel to peace process. The peace agreement was 1979. As the Egyptian president visited Jerusalem, many people didn't expect that to happen. 1977. However, the problem is it's always called a bilateral cold peace between Egypt and Israel. Maybe it's not a cold peace between the diplomats and between, leaders and politicians, etc. But when you ask, I'm not sure about the Israeli side, but when you ask the Egyptian people, of course, I'm not representing them, and of course, I cannot generalize, but many of them are yet to be convinced that this is a good peace, or this is a fair peace, or that the peace didn't bring a Palestinian state. So, I mean, you may convince politicians and you may get some outcomes, but I wonder if they are really productive. So it's just this comment about the narratives.
Okay, but thank you very much. I think we're going to move to the question and answers. While, if you have any of you want to ask a question, while I will collect questions, the written questions, please do so. Yes. Wait a second, I will take notes of who else. Okay. All right. Another, okay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to just start with the two, and if the notes are not arriving fast enough, I'll keep taking other people's. Okay, your name, just stand up, tell us your name, and
there's a mic.
And then Joseph next. Yes, okay.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Cameron, and I was wondering how the religious sites in the region impact this conflict and what the impacts of that would be.
Repeat, religious site?
The religious sites in the region, how they impact the conflict and what nation states are getting involved.
Yes, okay, you want to have a round, couple of questions? Okay, so we will take, your name is? Cameron, okay, religious site in the conflict. Joseph behind?
Joseph.
Hi, I'm Joseph. And my question is, to what extent has the Israeli constitutional crisis led to or impacted the war? And do you think Netanyahu's government will survive the war?
So I guess the latter question is probably me, but maybe others want to answer. And the first questions with respect to religious sites, you want to?
Well, the principal religious site at the moment, of course, is Jerusalem. I don't think I need to tell this audience that it's revered by all three of the monotheistic faiths. Right now, access for Muslims is limited. They can, but it's limited. And that creates tensions. In fact, many of the tensions that we've heard and read about in the West Bank over the course of the last 18 to 24 months stemmed from the inability of some Muslims, particularly young Muslims, to access the religious sites. But Muslims can go there. It's just very, very difficult because it's such it's such an emotional place for Jews and for Muslims and for Christians too. The Christian sites are a little bit off from where from the Haram al-Sharif, and so it's less contentious for Christians. Most Arab Christians have no problem visiting the Christian sites, but certainly the Haram al-Sharif. By the way, Jews do not have a problem visiting the Western Wall, which is their principal point of veneration. But of course, there are conflicting claims on Jerusalem itself. It's been one of the most, if not the single most problematic issue in negotiations. If you look at the negotiations, the Camp David II in 2000 and the negotiations in 2007 and 2008, which were the two high points of the negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, where we came extraordinarily close. But the one issue they didn't solve was Jerusalem. But it will have to be solved. If you're going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the whole issue of Jerusalem will have to be solved to the satisfaction of both sides.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with respect to the second questions about the constitutional crisis and what will happen after war, I am probably among the people who thinks that the constitutional crisis was very serious for 11 months, with months where Israeli went to the streets asking for the removal of that or a new election process. It's not something to take lightly. It certainly point the blame to the government pre-October 7. And I think that it's very unlikely that this government will last after the war. There are already many people in Israel who asked the resignations of Benjamin Netanyahu. So I predicted that something similar would occur after the war, just as it did after the 1973 war, where the Golda Meir was not able to stay in power after the major failure of not preempting or the surprise attack. So I probably going to subside. The other question that I see, and I'm just wearing different hat here, trying to read while I talk.
I'll just add to that one comment. In terms of Bibi Netanyahu's future, there have been some polls recently, granted in the midst of the tensions that Israel is now facing. It's probably not a great time to take a poll, but the polls are not very favorable.
No.
I mean, one thing that Bibi Netanyahu was known for was Mr. Security, and he failed. And I could give you a number of reasons why he failed, but he did. And just as Golda Meir paid the price in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War, even though subsequently we learned that she had been misinformed by some of her intelligence folks, Bibi Netanyahu will probably pay the price for this. Now, I never discount Mr. Netanyahu. I've met him well over a dozen times. He's an impressive man, and the guy's got more lives than a cat. And he's proved that when people have prematurely pronounced him dead. So stand by.
Okay, just another question, and here maybe others can respond to that. To what extent, in your opinion, has the expansion of settlement in the occupied territories contributed to the conflict? You want to start, Ahmed?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, it's one of the problems, and it gets me back to my first point about the avoiding to implement or to adopt the international law and the UN. So many, I lost the count. So many UN Security Council and UN General Assembly resolutions. There are really numbers of them. I cannot really count. And I guess this is one of the main problems. And that's why, again, I claim that it didn't start in October 7. It's an ongoing story that exploded in October 7, but it didn't start 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So the problem of commitment to international law, according to you, but is that also true that even a resistant movement needs to have some constraints with respect to the law of war, and that particular movement, Hamas, has undertaken act of brutality that is defying even what is acceptable within the constraint of international law and of war?
So maybe I will need another 10 minutes to answer this, but it's very complicated. However, one of the very simple facts is you can easily describe evil as evil. However, evil or violence or terrorism is not born in vacuum. And this is a real mistake that we're all committing nowadays. Not here, but I mean, in media and in diplomacy, we just assume that there is Hamas, terrorist organization. Yes, I agree. If you're killing civilians, then you're a terrorist organization. But the problem doesn't stop there. Without understanding the environment Hamas was created or was born, there is no way you're going to defeat Hamas, because it's not about defeating the organization. You can't defeat the organization. You're not going to defeat the idea behind the organization. So you destroy Hamas, you will have jihad. You destroy jihad, you will have, a third one. And it will keep going.
Interesting, a follow-up question. Hamas can teach a 400-level class on propaganda warfare. What role has propaganda played on both sides? How can we in the West get accurate informations versus misinformations? So anyone want to respond to that?
Personally, I've been avoiding social media. I never realized there were so many Middle East experts until I started reading social media. Wow, where were all these people when I was doing all of this? We talked about narratives, and people look at social media as an opportunity to expound on their particular narrative with very little information sometimes or understanding. This is an enormously complex issue, to repeat a cliche, but it is. And when you can't solve a problem for 70+ years, well, it must be pretty hard. The issues must go pretty deep. And it's more than just political issues. As Ahmed mentioned, there's a profoundly moral issues for both sides. And I'm sorry, you're not going to get an answer on social media. It's not going to be there. Personally, I mean, I subscribe to a wide variety of media that I respect. I don't always agree with them, but I know they fact check. And I have my own fact check capability, having some experience. There are people I know whose opinion and analysis I trust. And there, a lot of think tanks are producing some very thoughtful pieces, not all of which I agree with, but I'll have to say some smart people who understand the problem are putting forward some very interesting ideas and analyses. And if you want to know who they are, just let me know, because I get most of them. And so I would focus your attention on those and avoid social media. It's just going to get your blood pressure up there in the stratosphere, and it won't solve anything.
Okay, now the questions. Unfortunately, those who don't write clearly enough, I just have to pass. I mean, you write long, I mean, like prose. But okay. So if you write clearly, I will pick your question. So how do current event affect the Iranian dictatorship, given that it's funding Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah? Houthis? Sorry, keep going.
My very simple answer is the Arab-Israeli conflict, and we were just talking about this right before the panel. The Arab-Israeli conflict has been always consolidating authoritarianism in the area. So my very short answer is the Islamic regime of Iran may get some sort of benefits and some sort of support. They will get their power consolidated because they have now, you know, an ongoing enemy. And same analysis is just, you know, valid for Egypt and for other countries in the region.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
If you look at Iran's principal proxies in the Middle East, there's one common theme to them. There's, of course, Hamas. It's Arab and it's Sunni, which Iran is not either. There is Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which is Arab, but it is Shia. And then there are two principal militia in Syria, which is part Sunni, part Shia, all Arab. What strikes me about all of that is that Iran is willing to fight Israel to the last Arab. There are no Iranians dying in any of these, not one. And I don't know how long it's going to take them to wake up to this. This is, for whatever reason, whatever motivates Iran in its hatred and animosity toward Israel, it's decided that it's going to use its Arab proxies to carry out this war. Yes, it funds Hamas anywhere from $20 to $50 million a year, depending on the year. Hezbollah, you can multiply that at least by 2 and maybe even by 3, and depending on the situation. I think in the militias in Syria, it's probably less. I can't give you a figure. They provide training, they provide expertise, they provide weapons. Bear in mind, however, that now Iran is training not only Hezbollah, but also Hamas how to build rockets. So they don't necessarily have to import them in anymore because it is pretty difficult to get all this stuff into a place that is cordoned off so tightly, even though the tunnels provide some conduit. But Hamas can build them. They're not very good. In fact, they're really pretty bad. They don't have much guidance. We don't know the expertise of the folks building them or operating them. but they have provided the information they need to construct their own weapons. So Iran is doing a lot, and they certainly bear the responsibility for what is now taking place in Gaza.
So maybe more academic question. I know that the others weren't. Are the events in Israel-Gaza a confirmation that we're now in a multipolar world order where the US is no longer influential on the world stage, and actors like Russia, Hamas, and possibly China are emboldened to take ultimate risk without fears of repercussion? Gentlemen?
I mean, I don't disagree that we're now moving into a multipolar world. There's no question about it with the rising power and influence, especially of China, maybe less so Russia. It's pretty hard to threaten Europe when you can't even defeat a second-rate army in Ukraine. Be that as it may, the United States still remains pretty much the largest power in the world today. If you look, for example, that President Biden has dispatched 2 U.S. Navy battle carrier groups. If you've ever seen one of these, they're massive, huge firepower behind these battle groups. It's not just the aircraft carrier, but it's the destroyers, the guided missile ships, and the cruisers that come with it, and probably submarines, but you don't get to see those. 3 U.S. Air Force fighter squadrons, the 2 amphibious ships. There's really no other country that can deploy that level of firepower. And you notice where we put them, very strategically off the coast of Lebanon, and it's a clear sign to Hezbollah. The president said, don't, and he meant it, don't, or else. He didn't say that part, but Hezbollah is smart enough to figure that out. And by the way, the same holds true for the militia in Syria. Anything that can hit southern Lebanon will easily hit Syria as well, whether it's aircraft or whether it's cruise missiles or anything else that we're firing. And that's what really makes a U.S. power and influence in the world still pretty exceptional. On the economic side, clearly, we have a near-peer competitor, and we need to be aware of that. Technologically, I'd say the same thing. There are some other areas politically and diplomatically. I don't see the Chinese doing a whole lot. They're doing some in this particular conflict, but they really don't have the reach, and they certainly don't have the depth that the United States has, and is because, well, we've been messing around in the Middle East for a pretty long time.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me just move to the next question. There's so many of them here. There's one that is not very clear to me, but I'm just going to sort of see if I can interpret it. Where are the millions of Palestinians to go? I guess the question suggests that it's about evacuations of northern Palestinians to the south of Gaza. And I know that there is the Egyptians are also on the other side of the blockade. So I'm going to just address this question to Ahmed Abdrabou. Just provide us a little bit about your views about what's the next step for the Egyptians with respect to this evacuations of Gaza to the south.
I will take a wider perspective than just the Egyptian. The question of where Palestinians should go is not just about if they can go to Egypt or if they can go somewhere else. It's much more of what I was mentioning earlier. The real cause of the violence, the problem, is the absence of the two-state solution. The real political intention is not there. And for example, Secretary Blinken in Jerusalem, he mentioned and he recognized the right of Palestinian people to live in security, prosperity, etc., but he didn't mention the state. And I'm not sure why American diplomats are somehow not very clear, at least when they visit Israel, but there should be, a very clear narrative that we don't have even to ask this question, because it's like we are in the 21st century and we're still asking like where the Palestinian people will go. And as if we're dealing with just a small group of people. We have 2.2 million people just in Gaza, 3.5 million people in the West Bank. They deserve to have a state. I guess this is the only solution. Of course, back to Egypt. Egypt is just said that there's no way they are going to allow the Palestinians to go to Sinai because the Egyptian main fear is like, if they go to Egypt, there will never be way back to Gaza or elsewhere in Israel or historical Palestine, whatever you want to call it. So here is the real problem. Are we using the same criteria that we're judging Hamas or Jihad or Gaza people that we're using to judge ourselves, or that we're using to judge Israel? I guess there is or Ukraine or Russia. I guess there is a real problem here. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
Probably not, but it's okay. We can move on.
so there is no way to force the Palestinian people to go except stay where they are. This is a right to have a nation state that lives peacefully together with the Israeli state.
Okay. We're all moving to the Sinai Desert. Okay, surrounding the situation at places of higher education, NYU, UCA, Berkeley, Harvard, it might concern some of our students here, of students getting, what's that word, doxxed or getting death threat, okay, over their pro-Palestinian view. What are the role of young people during and post-conflict when, I can't read your handwriting, when it comes to human rights within the region?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to read it. Okay, I have to read. The teacher is reading again. Surrounding the situation at place of higher education, as we all know, there's been quite situations with respect to NYU. In NYU, UC Berkeley, at Harvard. It's good to have our chancellor here. Students getting death threat over their pro-Palestinian view. What is the role of young people during and post-conflict when it comes to the human rights within the region? And I imagine that the question suggests with respect to the human rights of Palestinians in the region. Is that correct? But it is now.
I still didn't get the question, to be honest.
How can pro-Palestinian or even pro-Israeli express themselves in this bipolarized
Okay, yeah, okay, got it.
context?
I'm teaching this, I guess I see some of my students here. I'm teaching a course on the history of the Middle East. But of course, my students would not let me to teach the history, and they will ask me definitely to focus on what's going on. And to be honest, I myself under pressure, because in my point of view, back to the academia, all students have the right to express themselves as long as they are, respectful to others. And in my class, maybe I'm not sure how successful I was. Maybe my students can best answer this question, but I guess I was trying to give as many, chances to different students from different backgrounds to express themselves, but some people are angry at me. And you can guess who, but your guess would be wrong, by the way.
Well, let's see if we can get you angry, Ahmed.
I can't believe it.
That you can't. Okay, so let's try this. So when we discuss any conflict, there are usually way to structure the conversations. And one is from an international law perspective, since it's the one that you brought to our attention. Do you think, and that's also for the ambassador, do you think that the war of Hamas was justified?
It's understandable. There is a big difference. And here is the real problem.
That's the first question, because there are two others. But go ahead, answer the first.
In my point of view, this is the wrong question. The very wrong question is like when you start to, and it's all the way in the media, you start the question, is Hamas a terrorist organization? My answer to this question is, can you please give me just a break and try to analyze the history of this conflict to understand why there is violence in the Middle East? Why Palestinian people, or many of them, or why at the moment many Arab people are supporting Hamas? It's not about my own answer. It's not, no, okay. No, I don't accept killing any civilian. And yes, I believe that in Israel, there are so many civilians. It's not true, because some Arab narratives would just go like, all Israelis are military, or, they are not civilians. No, not true. There are so many civilians in Israel. And yes, it's not justified that you kill any civilians. In my point of view, this is a very short answer, a very superficial answer. The real deep answer is, can we avoid violence? We destroy Hamas today, but can we avoid having another organization by a different name in the future?
Okay. so
Are Arab people supporting Hamas because Arab people are thirst to blood?
The
as-
professor is going to try to get you to answer more specifically, because perhaps, Ambassador, you want to try, now that you have lubricated yourself, you can focus us and just let us know because I'm going to ask also how it was undertaken, which is where you go. But I want to know, was that particular attack justifiable?
In my view, absolutely not. It's a clear, for me, it's a clear moral decision. But that does not detract from the just cause of Palestinians. And that may be the more appropriate question. Hamas is not going to be the instrument of the aspirations of the Palestinian people, full stop. And if you doubt that, I urge you to refer to the covenant or the constitution of Hamas, which makes no reference to negotiations, peace conferences, or anything of that nature. They're dead set against them. These are compromises with the Zionist state, or Israel, or the Jewish people. And Hamas is just simply not the vehicle for the aspirations and ambitions of the Palestinian state. Regrettably, it's more appropriately resides with a Palestinian Authority and Fatah. Sadly, however, that organization has been marginalized by the Israeli government over a period of years. They've been emasculated effectively. Moreover, you have Abu Mazen, who is in year 18 of a 4-year term, who has repeatedly postponed elections, and he has a cabal of corrupt, inept, and ineffectual sycophants in the Palestinian Authority. They are not the address either. But nevertheless, Palestinian Authority and the PLO did agree early on to reject violence and negotiate with Israel, which were really critical. They also agreed to abide by the various agreements reached between Israel and the PLO. Now, you can argue that final point, as Israelis certainly will, and Palestinians will. Be that as it may, they have been marginalized to the point that, as Bibi Netanyahu likes to say, I have no negotiating partner. Well, he did have, but now he does not. That is true. There is a way to fix that, and after this is done, we need to set about the process of finding a way to repair that, starting with how we fix the way the Palestinians are governed and the security situation. And as I indicated in my more formal remarks, I know for a fact that there are people right now, both in Washington and in Brussels, and a few other places, not yet in Israel because it's not the time, nor perhaps in some capitals in the Arab world, already talking about how do we go at this again? Because as Secretary Blinken mentioned, we need to provide a path for the Palestinians, which does include a two-state solution. Tony Blinken may not have mentioned in the public remarks because Bibi would have probably keeled over, but I can assure you that it is the position of our administration right now, especially Mr. Biden, that it has to be a two-state solution. I don't see any alternative. They throw out one-state solution, which is so impractical and unworkable and probably not acceptable to either Israelis or Palestinians.
So just let me counter, just for the sake of the argument. So the Palestinians just don't have good leadership from what you are recounting. The Hamas is too bellicose. It's never surrendered its violence against Israel. And the Palestinian Authority, as you suggest, is just simply inept and incompetent. So now what are the Palestinians left with? They need agency, they need representations, they don't have elections. So that's the first question. And since you have been very close to what happened, Madrid and thereafter, what are the lessons learned from a void in the Palestinian leaderships and also as a result of the failures of the Oslo Agreement? What are the lessons we can still learn so we don't do them again? I know it's a tough question, not just for you. You can also answer it, Ahmed.
The two high water marks in what used to be called the peace process were Camp David 2, and which took place in 2000, which probably was premature on Bill Clinton's part to call, but he did. The Israelis came willingly. It took considerable prodding on the part of Clinton to get Yasser Arafat to come. The Israelis tabled, without question, their most advanced proposal, which effectively would have given Palestinians 90%, 95 to 97% of Palestinian lands, that is in the West Bank and Gaza, with an understanding that they would negotiate swaps of land to compensate for the rest because of the settlements present at that time. That agreement was rejected by Yasser Arafat. Sadly, the U.S. administration at the time and Arab governments at the time failed in a couple of respects. The U.S. administration should have gone in advance to Arab capitals, particularly to Amman, to Cairo, to Riyadh, and a number of other capitals to win the support of Arab governments for this, because Arafat was not going to move without the support of key Arab governments. And he didn't have that. And even once Arab governments learned of this, which they ultimately did, they didn't reach out to Yasser Arafat. And both the Egyptian foreign minister and the Saudi ambassador to the United States at the time acknowledged that they were remiss in not standing up and urging Arafat to sign that agreement. And I'll tell you my own personal experience. Fast forward 10 years later, I was sitting with the senior Palestinian negotiator who wanted to present a plan to myself and Tony Blair. At the last minute, Tony canceled, so it was just me and my deputy who went. And I listened to the proposal that Saab made. Unfortunately, he has since passed away. I respected Saab Erekat immensely. He made a lot of people mad in Israel and in the United States, but he was immensely effective. Nevertheless, he presented his plan, and sadly, it was pretty much the plan of 2000. And I told him, I pulled him aside and I said, Saab, you know, that's the 2000 plan, which you rejected. And he said, and I regret that.
Okay, thank you. I mean,
I just want to, just one final point. In 2007 and 8,
you don't want?
George Bush administration, who was no fan of this, actually did commit to negotiating. And he brought together the Israelis and the Palestinians. Condi Rice led the American side, and they got extremely close again. And there's a little bit of confusion about what happened. But one of the problems was that Ehud Olmert, then prime minister, was indicted for bribery. They were convicted. I think even served time in the big house. When the Palestinians saw that, they withdrew from the negotiations. And that's the last really true opportunity we had to close a deal.
Well, we know there have been a lot of lost opportunities since, and we hope that this unfortunate, very tragic situations will prompt a new soul searching as to the way we move forward. And we're rethinking about the lesson learned of the last Oslo Agreement and the Camp David 2, and see how we can move more positively forward. Difficult thought experiment in those moments of crisis. And I really want to thank you for all of you coming to see us today and share some of your ideas. Next time, write a little bit better. I think very much, and I hope you continue to follow us and come to our event. Thank you to the panelists who did a great job. And to our chancellor to show that we are model with respect to our university and how we handle ourselves. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.